Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a story that's part whisper, part howl. The story of why medieval peasants feared the wind. Picture yourself standing outside a small, thatch-roof cottage on a chilly night, the moon hidden behind thick clouds, and the wind curling and moaning through the trees and cracks in the wooden walls. It's not just a breeze, it's a voice, a presence, a warning. You probably won't survive this without at least one shiver running down your spine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm curious, where are you as the wind whispers outside your window? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge home after a long day of hard labor. Your hands sore from pulling weeds, your feet dusted with earth, the horizon darkening with the coming dusk. The wind picks up, teasing the dry leaves and rattling loose shutters. It isn't just the chill that makes you pause. It's the sound, an eerie, restless sigh that seems almost alive. It feels like the breath of the world itself, shifting, murmuring secrets you're not meant to understand. Medieval peasants lived lives so intimately tied to nature's moods that the wind was more than weather. It was a force with personality, power, and danger. While today you might shrug off a gust as no big deal, back then, wind could spell disaster or death. The strange thing is, it wasn't just the damage it could cause. The invisible menace, the unsettling noises, the uncanny timing. It haunted their imaginations. Here's a solid historical fact to anchor you. Medieval villagers depended heavily on agriculture, so weather was a constant worry. Winds could dry out crops, blow away precious topsoil, or signal an approaching storm. But beyond that, wind carried meanings wrapped in superstition and folklore. People listened for what the wind might be telling them, whether a curse was near, or if spirits wandered the dark fields. Oddly enough, some peasants believed that certain winds were actually the voices of the dead, or spirits angry at the living. This fringe idea isn't just spooky storytelling. It reflects how closely humans have always linked natural phenomena to the supernatural. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were widespread or confined to particular regions and times. But there's no doubt the wind's eerie qualities sparked a mix of fear, respect, and desperate hope. You might find it amusing, or unsettling, that peasants thought the wind could whisper warnings or even carry curses from enemies. Imagine trying to sleep while those voices swirl through your thatch roof, hinting at misfortune. It's like having an invisible, unpredictable guest whose mood you could never predict. And that unpredictability was a big part of why the wind scared them so much. So tonight, as you listen, remember that fear isn't just about what we can see or touch. Sometimes it lives in the spaces between, the howls of the wind, the shadows in the corners, and the silent weight of things unseen. You settle into that uneasy feeling, the one where every rustle in the branches feels like a secret being shared just with you. The wind doesn't just blow, it speaks. To medieval peasants, that whispering wasn't random noise, but a hidden language encoded by the natural world and its unseen inhabitants. You're hearing messages, warnings, or even commands, carried on invisible currents. Imagine you're standing in a field at dawn, the mist curling around your boots and the wind brushing past your ears. It sounds like voices, soft murmurs, or even laughter just beyond reach. You might think that's the wind playing tricks on you, but for peasants, it was communication from forces far beyond their control or understanding. They believed the wind could carry news from the other world, a kind of spectral mail service. The mainstream historical fact here is that many medieval cultures believed in animism. The idea that natural elements like wind, trees, rivers, and stones had spirits or consciousness. So the wind wasn't just a physical force. It was alive, aware, and capable of interacting with humans. This wasn't just superstition, but a worldview that shaped daily life. Farmers would interpret the wind's direction and intensity as messages about the crops, the seasons, or even their personal fortunes. Quirky or fringe? Well, some peasants believed that if the wind whistled in a certain way, it meant a spirit was trying to warn you about danger ahead. Or worse, that a curse had been laid on your family. You might laugh now, but think about how you react to your phone's notification tone. It grabs your attention, tells you something important is happening. For them, the wind's messages were just as urgent, even if more cryptic. There's still scholarly debate about how literally peasants took these wind messages. Did everyone believe the wind spoke, or was it mostly a poetic way to explain natural sounds? Were these ideas shaped more by pagan traditions or Christian reinterpretations? Historians keep hashing this out, since the medieval record is patchy and contradictory. And it's easy to see why these beliefs stuck. The wind's sound can be haunting, a constant reminder of nature's power and mystery. It's not just the noise but the timing, like a sudden gust when you're alone on a dark path, or a steady moan during a lonely night. These sounds could evoke a powerful sense of presence, sometimes friendly, often hostile. Peasants would often try to read these messages. If the wind shifted from the north, it might mean frost was coming. If it blew harsh and cold, it could predict a bad harvest. These interpretations were tied to generations of observation and oral tradition. They learned to be wary because ignoring these signs could mean ruin. You might wonder if the wind's voice was ever comforting. Actually, yes. Some winds were considered protective, blessings sent by gods or nature spirits. So it wasn't just fear. There was respect and even gratitude wrapped up in how peasants heard the wind. So the wind carried on, endlessly shifting, whispering warning, shaping a world where every gust was a story, every howl a message. You're not just hearing the wind now. You're listening to a conversation that shaped medieval minds and lives. The night falls heavier now, and with it comes a wind that doesn't just whisper, it howls. You pull your cloak tighter as the gusts sweep across the village, rattling shutters and sending dry leaves tumbling like restless spirits. In medieval times, the night was when fear of the wind peaked. It was no longer just a natural force, but something alive, dangerous, and downright supernatural. Imagine yourself lying on a straw mattress beneath a thin wool blanket, every creak of the house amplified by the howling wind outside. Your eyes dart to the window where shadows seem to twist and dance with the gusts. The wind becomes a voice that sings songs of doom and tragedy, ghostly wails, eerie laughter, and sometimes a mournful cry that chills your bones. It's no wonder peasants dreaded this nightly chorus. Historically, people in medieval Europe widely believed that nighttime was when spirits and demons roamed most freely, and the wind was their invisible chariot. The Wild Hunt, a ghostly procession of spectral riders often associated with storms and strong winds, was feared across the continent. Peasants thought the howl of the wind was the distant sound of this supernatural cavalcade riding through the skies, hunting souls or punishing the wicked. Here's a quirky detail. Some folklore suggested that if you listened closely, you could hear the names of those doomed to die whispered in the wind's howl. Imagine that, your name carried on a cold gust, a personalized death notice. Not exactly the kind of bedtime story that helps you sleep. Historians still argue whether these tales were common superstition or the invention of later storytellers trying to explain natural phenomena. Were these howling sounds always interpreted as ominous, or did some hear them as protective warnings? The answer probably varies by region and culture. You might chuckle at the idea of people fearing wind sounds as much as a horror movie jump scare today. But consider this. Without modern technology, isolation, and harsh living conditions, the night's eerie noises could easily fuel genuine terror. A sudden gust knocking a lantern over could mean disaster. Or worse, a sign that something sinister was near. Nighttime wind also had practical consequences. It could damage poorly built homes, spread fires, or ruin stored crops. So the fears were grounded in real danger, mixed with the unknown and supernatural. It's a potent cocktail that kept peasants on edge, listening intently for the next gust's message. By the time dawn approached, you'd be half expecting the wind to carry away your very soul. That's how deeply the night and wind were woven into the fabric of medieval fear. The wind doesn't just brush past you anymore. It feels like it's searching. In the dead of night, you sense it's carrying something unseen, something not quite human. Medieval peasants believed that wind was a bridge between worlds, a carrier for invisible forces like ghosts, demons, and curses. When the wind picked up, you knew the unseen world was stirring. Imagine standing near the edge of the village, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and smoke from hearth fires. The wind suddenly shifts, colder and sharper, carrying whispers you can't quite catch. To you, it might feel like a chill or a rustle of leaves, but to medieval folk, it was a sign that spirits were moving through, unseen but palpable. Here's a solid historical fact. Many medieval beliefs linked wind with the spiritual realm. Some thought the wind was a medium through which ghosts communicated, or a pathway for demons to travel between the mortal world and their dark domains. The idea wasn't just superstition, but integrated into religious practices and everyday precautions. One quirky fringe belief held that witches could control the wind to spread curses or misfortune. This might sound like something out of a fairy tale, but in a time when mysterious illnesses or bad luck needed explanations, blaming wind-manipulating witches was a popular theory. Historians still debate how deeply these ideas penetrated peasant culture. Was wind really feared as a gateway for evil, or was this more the domain of clerics and educated elites? Some suggest the wind's link to the supernatural was a way for peasants to explain the unexplainable dangers in their environment: disease, crop failure, sudden death. You might think it strange to blame an invisible force like wind for curses or hauntings, but consider how the wind's invisibility makes it perfect for projection. It's there, but you can't see what it carries. Perfect for stories and fears to fill the gaps. Peasants often took protective measures when the wind howled just right. They might whisper prayers, hang herbs or charms in doorways, or avoid going out until the wind died down. These rituals gave a sense of control against a terrifying, unseen enemy. So the wind became more than just air in motion. It was a carrier of the supernatural, a reminder that the world was filled with dangers beyond what your eyes could see. The wind now feels like a living beast prowling just beyond your doorstep, unpredictable and wild. You've learned to read its moods. When it's gentle, you breathe a sigh of relief. When it turns fierce, you brace yourself for trouble. Medieval peasants lived by these signs, relying on the wind's temperament as a kind of weather report and omen rolled into one. Picture yourself leaning against the rough wooden frame of your cottage, feeling the wind shift direction and strength. You remember your grandmother's stories of the north wind, a bitter force that brought frost and hardship. Each breeze had a name, a character, and a reputation. It wasn't just about where the wind came from, but what it meant. A reliable historical fact is that medieval agrarian societies closely tracked the four cardinal winds: north, south, east, and west, assigning each distinct traits and effects. The north wind was often seen as cold and harsh, while the south brought warmth and rain. Peasants used these beliefs to anticipate planting and harvest times, entwining weather wisdom with folklore. Now here's a quirky twist. In some parts of Europe, peasants believed that the devil's wind blew through certain valleys, a cursed gust that could twist your mind or cause madness. Whether it was just a strong local wind or a sinister force, the fear was very real. People even left offerings to appease this particular wind, hoping to keep its malevolent influence at bay. Historians still debate how much of this wind personification was practical meteorology and how much was superstition. Was naming winds a way to pass down crucial survival information, or did it serve more as a cultural narrative to make sense of nature's unpredictability? The truth probably lies somewhere in between. You might smile at how peasants gave personality to the wind, but it's a clever survival tactic. When every gust might bring destruction, putting a face, or a name, on the threat makes it a little less terrifying. Plus, it gave them stories to share around the hearth on cold nights. And let's be honest, the devil's wind sounds way cooler than a bland meteorological term. It's the kind of tale that keeps you awake long after the wind stops howling outside. You step outside just as the wind picks up again, feeling it tug at your cloak and whisper through the trees. This time, it's not just the air you notice, but the tangible effect the wind has on daily life in a medieval village. The wind was more than a mysterious presence. It was a practical, sometimes brutal force shaping survival. Imagine trying to keep a fire burning as the wind shifts from a gentle breeze to a fierce gale. Peasants depended on fire for warmth, cooking, and light, but a strong wind could snuff flames in an instant or send sparks flying, risking the whole village. Fires were both lifelines and hazards, and wind dictated how carefully you had to tend them. Here's a grounded historical fact. Medieval houses were often thatched with straw, a highly flammable material. Fierce winds could spread fire rapidly, devastating homes and barns. Because of this, villagers learned to build windbreaks, rows of trees, fences, or earth mounds, to shield their settlements from destructive gusts. On the quirky side, some peasants believed the wind could carry away more than just smoke and ashes. There was a superstition that if a strong wind blew through your home, it might steal your breath or your soul, leaving you vulnerable to illness or death. It's easy to dismiss this now, but in a time without modern medicine, such beliefs were part of a survival mindset. Historians still argue how much these beliefs influenced architectural choices. Did peasants build windbreaks purely for practical reasons? Or were spiritual fears of the wind also a factor? Some suggest it was a blend, protecting homes from both physical and supernatural harm. You might find it ironic that the same wind you enjoy on a summer day was a constant threat to life and property. It wasn't just about inconvenience. It was a matter of life or death, comfort or misery. So every gust was a reminder. The wind is a powerful force that demands respect. You learn to watch the sky, feel the air, and prepare, because ignoring the wind's warning could cost everything you had. The wind grows more insistent now, swirling leaves and bending the branches above your head. It seems to carry messages, if only you knew how to read them. Medieval peasants believed that the wind could predict the future, acting as a secret messenger from the divine or the supernatural. This was less about science and more about intuition, signs, and a deep connection to the natural world. Imagine standing outside your cottage just before dawn, listening as the wind shifts from a gentle sigh to a sharp whistle. You remember your village elder telling you that a sudden cold wind meant bad weather was coming. Or worse, that a death in the village was imminent. The wind was a messenger delivering warnings you couldn't afford to ignore. A solid historical fact is that many medieval communities practiced wind divination. They observed the wind's direction, strength, and behavior to make decisions about planting crops, traveling, or preparing for storms. This was especially vital when calendars were rudimentary and weather forecasts non-existent. Now for a quirky tidbit. Some believe that if you caught a breath of wind at the exact moment someone died, you could inherit their spirit, or their curse. Imagine the anxiety around simply breathing the air. This belief might seem outlandish, but it's a reminder of how closely people linked wind and life's mysteries. Historians still debate how widespread and systematic wind divination really was. Was it a formalized practice or more of a casual folk tradition? Some think that the idea of reading the wind as a prophetic tool was amplified by storytellers and chroniclers later on. You might chuckle at how people thought a breeze could be a fortune teller, but think about it. Without modern technology, every natural sign was precious information. The wind was a constantly moving oracle, unpredictable but vital. So when you feel that sudden gust, remember you're tapping into a centuries-old tradition of listening to the wind for clues, both practical and mysterious, about what the next day might bring. The wind picks up again, more playful now, teasing the edges of your cloak as if testing your nerves. But beneath that teasing lies a powerful force that shaped not just fear, but folklore. Tales about the wind wove themselves into the very fabric of medieval storytelling, becoming cautionary fables and mythic explanations for everything from lost travelers to cursed lands. Picture yourself huddled by the fire, listening to the village storyteller describe how the wind was once a wild spirit trapped between worlds, forever wandering. Each gust was thought to be the spirit's breath, restless and searching. These stories were not just entertainment but lessons, warnings wrapped in fantasy. Historically, folklore about the wind often served as moral tales or explanations for natural disasters. For example, some legends blamed the wind for sweeping away the greedy or punishing those who broke sacred laws. It was a way to teach respect for nature and community rules. A quirky note. In some cultures, it was believed that wind could carry voices from the dead, and by listening carefully, you might hear secret messages. Others thought the wind could steal voices or laughter, leaving silence behind as a sign of impending doom. Imagine losing your voice to the wind. Now that's a plot twist. Historians still argue about the origins of many wind legends. Were they invented to explain dangerous weather, or did they arise from older pagan beliefs about spirits and the afterlife? The truth likely varies from place to place, blending fact, faith, and fear. You might find it amusing that the wind was both a source of life-giving air and a mysterious messenger with a mischievous streak. It's like nature's own mood ring, shifting between calm and chaos. So when the wind sings outside your window tonight, think of the countless stories told through the ages. Tales of spirits, warnings, and the thin veil between this world and the next. The wind howls through the village again, this time sharper and colder, like a warning you can't ignore. But beyond the spooky stories and omens, the wind was a real, tangible challenge to daily medieval life. It influenced how people farmed, built, and lived, often forcing peasants to adapt in creative ways to survive. Imagine trudging through muddy fields, the wind whipping your hair and chilling your skin as you prepare for planting season. You know from experience that a sudden gust could blow away precious seeds or erode the soil you've worked so hard to tend. Wind wasn't just a background nuisance. It was a threat to the food on your table. A historical fact to chew on. Medieval farmers developed techniques like contour plowing and planting hedgerows to reduce soil erosion caused by wind. These practices weren't just smart agriculture. They were lifelines in an age when every harvest meant the difference between feast and famine. Now here's a quirky detail. Some peasants believed that planting at the wrong time, when the wind spirit was angry or restless, would doom the crops. They might consult local wind calendars or elders who claimed to understand the mood of the wind, blending observation with superstition. Historians still debate the balance between practical knowledge and magical thinking in medieval farming. Did peasants rely more on empirical techniques or on mystical beliefs to guide their planting and harvesting? Most likely, it was a mix, pragmatism wrapped in ritual. You might smile at how seriously people took the wind, but consider this. Without weather forecasts or scientific instruments, reading the wind's patterns was essential survival skill disguised as folklore. So every gust you feel today is a whisper of the past, of a time when the wind was both a brutal force and a teacher, shaping the land and the lives of those who worked it. The wind rustles through the trees once more, carrying a chill that seeps into your bones. You start to notice the sound it makes as it passes over rooftops and rattles shutters, a noise that to medieval ears was sometimes terrifying, sometimes oddly comforting. The wind was a constant presence, one that shaped not just practical life, but also the very architecture of villages. Imagine standing by your window, watching the rooftops struggle against the gusts. You recall how medieval peasants built their homes with the wind in mind. Low, sturdy walls, steep roofs to shed rain, and small windows to block drafts. Their homes were fortress-like, designed to keep out more than just burglars. Here's a solid fact. Medieval houses often featured wind holes or small vents strategically placed to allow airflow without letting in a full blast of cold air. This helped manage moisture and kept the interior from becoming a damp, moldy prison, a real concern in those days. On the quirky side, some villages placed charms or amulets near doorways and windows to ward off evil winds believed to bring sickness or bad luck. Imagine the same folk wisdom that guided you to wear a woolen cloak, also insisting you hang a dried herb bundle to keep the wind's bad spirits at bay. Historians still debate how much architecture was shaped by superstition versus pure practicality. Was the wind hole design inspired by empirical knowledge, or did spiritual beliefs influence these choices? Again, the answer probably lies in a blend of both. You might find it amusing that something as mundane as a breeze could dictate how your home was built. But when the wind can ruin your crops, spread disease, and freeze you solid, you learn to respect its power, even architecturally. So the next time you feel a draft under a door or a chill through a window crack, remember those medieval builders who fought the wind with wood, stone, and a little bit of magic. The wind wraps around you like an invisible cloak, stirring up dust and the faint scent of burning wood from distant hearths. You remember the market day, the loud haggling, the clatter of carts, all somehow muffled by the ever-present wind. But behind the bustle, the wind was a silent player in trade and communication, sometimes a blessing, sometimes a curse. Imagine being a traveling merchant trying to shout prices over the wind's roar, or a messenger riding hard through gusts that slow your horse and blur your vision. The wind affected the flow of goods and news, dictating how far and fast stories and commodities could travel. A historical fact: medieval towns often positioned marketplaces and important roads with the wind in mind to ensure smoke from fires dispersed and unpleasant odors didn't linger. A crude but practical form of urban planning before sanitation. The wind was part of the town's pulse, influencing daily rhythms. Now for a quirky fact. Some peasants believed the wind could carry gossip, literally. If the wind changed direction suddenly, it was said that secrets or lies were on the move, spreading unseen through the village. Imagine worrying about your whispered words catching a breeze and flying right back to haunt you. Historians still argue how much the wind shaped medieval communication and social dynamics. Was it merely a physical force, or did it hold symbolic meaning in how people understood rumor, news, and trust? You might chuckle at the idea of the wind as a gossiper, but consider how easily news traveled by word of mouth, and how much the environment shaped that. So every time the wind rustles through the marketplace or down a narrow street, remember it's more than air moving. It's a carrier of voices, stories, and the unseen threads that connect a community. The wind whistles again, sharper now, slicing through the narrow alleys and stirring the smoke from village chimneys. You sense its invisible fingers reaching into every corner of life, even affecting health and medicine in medieval times. The wind was both a carrier of sickness and, paradoxically, a purifier, a dual role that made peasants wary and respectful. Imagine the old herbalist's hut, filled with drying bundles of herbs and roots. Windows cracked open just enough to let fresh air in, but not too much to invite the harmful bad air. Medieval people believed that diseases often spread through miasma, noxious air carried by the wind. The right kind of breeze could heal, the wrong kind could kill. Here's a historical fact. Quarantines in medieval cities often involved closing gates and monitoring the wind direction to prevent plague and other illnesses from spreading. The idea of clean and dirty air was very real and linked directly to the wind's behavior. A quirky detail. Some peasants believed that if the wind blew from certain directions at specific times, it could bring or ward off spirits that caused illness. For example, a north wind might be seen as a death wind, while a gentle southern breeze was considered life-giving. Historians still debate how much the concept of miasma influenced medieval medicine versus spiritual beliefs about wind and health. Was the fear of bad air purely medical, or was it deeply entangled with superstition and religious ideas? You might find it a bit ironic that in an age before germs, people were so focused on wind and air quality, something we now study scientifically, but they experienced as mystery and magic. So next time a cold breeze brushes your face, think of those medieval folk trying to stay healthy by understanding and appeasing the wind's invisible powers. The wind sighs softly, carrying the distant sound of bells and the faint rustle of leaves. You feel how deeply it weaves into the spiritual life of medieval peasants, acting as a messenger between the earthly and the divine. It wasn't just about cold gusts and rattling shutters. It was about presence, power, and prayer. Imagine standing in the village churchyard, the wind swirling around stone crosses and wooden statues. The priests chant, their voices rising and falling like the wind itself, invoking protection against storms and evil spirits. The wind was seen as God's breath, both gentle and terrifying, capable of blessing or punishing. A historical fact. Medieval liturgies and prayers often included petitions for calm winds during sea voyages or planting seasons, reflecting the dependence on favorable weather for survival. Wind was not merely a natural phenomenon, but a divine force to be respected and appeased. On the quirky side, some peasants believed that the wind could carry prayers up to heaven, and that specific winds on certain feast days were especially holy. They might face the wind when praying, hoping their words would be carried straight to the saints. Historians still debate whether these beliefs were universal or varied widely across regions. Did all medieval communities see the wind as sacred, or was this an overlay of Christian ritual onto older pagan ideas? You might smile at how a simple breeze could be both a spiritual messenger and a practical challenge. It's like the medieval mind's way of blending what they knew with what they hoped for. So when the wind rustles softly outside your window tonight, think of it as a whisper from the past, a breath of faith, fear, and the eternal dance between humans and the forces they cannot control. The wind hums a low, steady tune, slipping through the cracks and corners of your imagined village. By now, you might be thinking it's all doom and gloom. But medieval peasants also found ways to harness the wind's power, turning a foe into a cautious ally. The wind wasn't just feared, it was worked with, even celebrated. Picture towering windmills on the horizon, their sails turning slowly in the breeze. These giants transformed the wind's invisible force into mechanical energy, grinding grain into flour or pumping water from marshy fields. For peasants, windmills represented a quiet revolution, less backbreaking labor, more efficient farming, and a glimpse of progress. Here's a solid fact. The first European windmills appeared around the 12th century and quickly spread, becoming vital to rural economies. They weren't just tech marvels. They symbolized human ingenuity overcoming nature's challenges. Now for a quirky snippet. Some peasants believed windmills were inhabited by spirits, benevolent helpers or mischievous tricksters, who could affect the mill's speed and output. Tales warn not to mock the windmill lest you anger its unseen resident. Historians still argue the extent to which windmills changed peasant life. Did they mainly benefit wealthier landowners, or did small farmers also reap rewards? The answer is complex, tied to local economies and social hierarchies. You might find it funny that such a noisy, clunky contraption could inspire both awe and superstition, but that's medieval life in a nutshell, where magic and mechanics often mingled. So the next time you hear the wind whistle past a modern turbine, remember the humble windmill's legacy. how it turned a feared force into a source of power and possibility. The wind now softens, a gentle murmur that seems to wrap around you like a familiar old blanket. After all the stories and fears, adaptations and superstitions, it's time to look at the bigger picture. How the wind shaped medieval peasants' lives in ways both visible and invisible, practical and profound. You trudge through your day, feeling the wind as a force you can't control, but must respect. It influenced everything, from where you built your home, to how you prayed, to what you ate. The wind was woven into your very existence, a constant companion that could nurture or destroy, heal or harm. Here's a final historical fact. Despite the hardships, medieval peasants developed a deep, intricate knowledge of their environment. They learned to read the wind's signs, timing planting and harvesting, and interpreting omens. This knowledge was vital, passed down through generations as both practical wisdom and cultural heritage. On a quirkier note, some communities even held wind festivals, celebrating the changing seasons and honoring the spirits they believed controlled the air. These gatherings mixed joy and reverence, showing how the wind was not only feared, but also embraced as part of life's rhythm. Historians still debate how much of this was conscious adaptation versus inherited tradition. Was the fear of wind more about survival instinct, or did it become embedded in culture simply because it had to? You might chuckle at how something as intangible as wind could command so much attention and respect. But in a time when the future was uncertain, every breeze carried meaning, sometimes whispered, sometimes shouted. So as you lay back now, feeling the air around you, remember those medieval souls who lived with the wind always at their backs. They feared it, respected it, and ultimately learned to live alongside it. Now, as the night deepens and the wind outside settles into a soft sigh, let yourself relax fully. Imagine the village growing quiet, the last flicker of candlelight fading as sleep calls you gently. The wind, once wild and fierce, now becomes a lullaby, a soothing rhythm that cradles you softly. Think of the medieval peasants, weary yet resilient, finding peace after a day shaped by the breath of the world around them. Their fears and hopes carried on the same currents that now whisper through your window. You've journeyed with them through gusts and gales, felt their struggle and their cleverness. Let that knowledge settle inside you, a quiet comfort that even the wildest forces can be faced and understood. So breathe deeply. Feel the calm wind brushing your skin, the gentle night wrapping around you like a protective cloak. You are part of this endless story, connected across centuries by the simple, invisible wind. Sleep well, friend. Tomorrow's breeze will be waiting. Sweet dreams.